winners.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for showing up and welcome here to our new post community hall. What I'd like to do tonight is cover a little bit of the history of American Legion, our post here, and then cover on a follow-up to John Southwick's talk when he had the letters from James Lucas and some of the people that he talked about in those letters. And in my research with the Civil War vets and that, I have those individuals. And as far as I'll let you know what when they mustered in, when they mustered out, if any of them were killed in action along with James Lucas or whatever. And then a little bit of some of the stuff that we've been doing with Maple Hill Cemetery and also St. Pat's as far as the veterans. So I'm Robert St. John. I'm the commander here for Post 912, and I'm also the historian. I've been with the American Legion here for only 4 years, and I kind of kicked myself for not joining in 1974 when I got out of the service. These 4 years have been very rewarding. And the camaraderie and everything with everybody, with all the members that we have, not only here, but throughout the county and everything is just amazing, unbelievable. A little bit about myself. I enlisted in the Air Force in 1970. I spent 4 years to 1974 when I got out. Went down for the 6 weeks of basic training down at Lackland, and usually about 2 weeks before you graduate from basic military training, they give you a job code of what you're going to be doing as you serve. And my AFSC, which was Air Force Service Code at the time, was a 58130. So when the TIs called my name and shouted that out, and I says, well, what's that? He says, you're going to be a parachute rigger. And I said, well, how's that going to help me in civilian life? What kind of job am I going to get in civilian life? And if anybody's been in the military, you know the usual response is, well, that's what the military wants. That's what you're going to be. So I left Lackland and went to Chanute Air Force Base in Illinois. And I went through 13 weeks of tech school to become a parachute rigger. My next duty assignment from there, which was another little surprise, was I got orders to go to El Central Naval Air Facility in the middle of the Mojave Desert. Now you got a naval air facility, which an Air Force guy going to, in the middle of the Mojave Desert. Well, what do you do there? It happens to be a joint Air Force Navy parachute test center. So they design new parachutes for new aircraft coming up, present aircraft if they're upgrading the ejection seats or whatever. So I went to El Centro. There was only 200 Air Force personnel on the whole base. El Centro was also the winter home of the Navy Blue Angels precision flying team. So when they had practice, 6 o'clock in the morning, those F-4 Phantoms were just a screaming, full top level through the base. So when I was at El Centro, worked with people from Lockheed, and they were designing a new parachute system for the SR-71 at that time. And what they do is you have an individual, there was a master sergeant by the name of Mr. Powers, and he was testing the chute system. It was a personal ejection system. And he was testing the system. The chute failed. So he had to use his reserve. And lo and behold, that reserve that he used happened to be one that I packed. So the next day, he walks into the parachute shop with a bottle of champagne. That's the tradition. If a pilot uses a rigger's chute, they give you a bottle. Because every chute that you pack has a little packet in it, and you sign off when you pack that chute, so they know who packed it. So, spent a little while in El Centro, and then I had orders to go to that little sunny Southeast Asia. So I went to Thailand, and I spent a year in Thailand. And while I was there, and there was a newspaper article that appeared here in the North Countryman on it, was I had another chute that was used by a pilot over North Vietnam, and he made it back, and that was my second bottle of champagne. And, but only two. Would have liked more, but only two. No. They were gone that night. So then after...
What happens if you don't, if you do a parachute and it doesn't work? Do they shoot you or?
No. But we always told them, if it doesn't work, bring it back, we'll give you another one.
But what happens with those first ones that don't go and then yours does? I mean.
Well, the other ones they're buckled in, they just release the buckles and they go.
So they never know who put that one.
Well, no, that would have been one done by the Lockheed people or whatever themselves. And that was always expected. That's why they always had a reserve chute in case that one didn't work with the ejection system. So then after my year in Thailand, I put in for Plattsburgh because I still had a year and a half to go. And the closest I got was Loring Air Force Base in Limestone, Maine. And if you think it's cold here, let me tell you, Limestone, Maine, and my wife can attest that there was one time they shut the base down because it was so darn cold. They couldn't fly, nothing. And it's also a unique, and Joe knows, pit because he was stationed up at Loring also. And it was not uncommon where there was a base where you had B-52s and KC-135s, the tankers that were there. And it was not uncommon for them to stop planes from taking off or landing because there were moose on the runway. So but anyway, then my 4 years ended. So, and now I'll start on the Legion. The American Legion itself, as a national organization, started on September 16th, 1919, when U.S. Congress chartered the American Legion. Ourselves, Montgomery Post 912, we received a temporary charter on May 14th, 1920, and the charter was made permanent on July 6, 1922. So this year we will be celebrating our 91st birthday here in as the post in Rouses Point. The charter members at that time were Harold D. Ashline Sr., that would have been Bud's father, okay? Harvey J. Kuchar, John L. Cox, Alexander Dan, Frederick Foy, Henry Foy, Geo Kenyon, Harry Landry, Ernest Mayo, Theodore Miro, Ernest J. Manette, Hiram Rochester, Dewey Seguin, and Thomas Ward. And these men were all veterans of World War I. The current membership of the post consists mainly now of Korean and Vietnam veterans, because unfortunately we're losing our World War II vets. Now, it's tragic, but it is happening. We have very few World War II vets left here in the post. From 1920 to 1939, the post met in a room on the first floor of the hose building on Lake Street. Now, the hose building, which was the old fire station that used to be next to the village office down there, which has been moved by Vic West, correct, Donna? Moved by Vic West and turned into apartments, but that's where the post first met. And then in 1939 to 1944, they met in a room on the second floor of the Chapman block on Lake Street, which is gone now, which was right where the laundromat is now, and that used to be the Chapman block. And we've been here at 29 Pratt Street since 1944, when Legion members decided to purchase the old Opera House, which was Kucher's Opera House here on Pratt Street. In May of 2006, it was decided to take down the back section and rebuild. That's where the bar is now. And the funding for that project started with then Commander Rodney Wright asking for donations and everything for the building fund. So it started with Rodney. When it was, if I remember correctly, Rodney, it was under private ownership type thing or whatever. Before that,
Well, the post itself is in the 912, but they leased out the bar.
right, leased out the bar and that, and it was run by private people or whatever. And then it was decided after that for the post to run it themselves. So, in 2005, the phase one was started where the meeting room addition, which was in the back, was torn down. Framing the new facility was done in that spot. Phase two during the same year included moving the bar from the old section in the front to the new section at the southern end. This included handicapped accessible bathrooms, a walk-in cooler, large storeroom on lasting ceramic floors. Phase three, which was done at that time, involved an update in updating the kitchen. This consisted of a large 8-burner gas stove with 2 large gas ovens, a large fryer, automatic dishwasher, stainless steel sinks, and ceramic floors. That's what is out there right now. The cost of that at the time was around $200,000 to do that. And that's not counting the volunteer labor. And we'll get into the volunteer labor, because what you see here on the interior was all done by volunteer labor, mostly by members of this post that redid this. So you look at what is there and you realize with the members what they did to keep the cost down, but also to make it a first-class facility. And at that time, members Jules Tran and Dick Baker filled the role of general contractors during that addition out there. And just to keep on with as far as the addition in that, in June of 2010, phase 4 was started, which is this right here. Community and meeting room that was envisioned to be added at the south end of the facility had to be built at the north end. We originally had plans to go to the south end, but unforeseen circumstances, we had to do this. So the 2-story front structure known as Kucher's Opera House, where the Legion meetings and community events were held, was torn down, and a 1-story modern and spacious new community events and meeting room was constructed. The demolition of the building, the concrete footings and slab work, as well as the framing and roof structure, was contracted out to local contractors. All the interior work has been completed again by membership volunteers, led by Dick Baker as the general contractor. So Dick was the one that envisioned this. There were times when Dick would draw this up and we would look at it and say, what? That's gonna work? And Dick was always saying, yes, it's gonna work. Don't worry about it, it's gonna work. And it did. It did. We owe a lot of credit to Dick. The new entranceway to the bar and the separate community room are all ceramic tiled, as is a portion of the community room, which is also carpeted. Dance floor has been installed. We have a handicapped, accessible unisex restroom that was put in. The cost of this project here was about $260,000. And that's all contracting. Then you had all the membership labor. For all you had was bare 2x4 walls, all the sheetrock, everything from the electrical, everything in was done by the membership here. We presently have 220 members here in Post 912. We have an active color guard, honor guard of about 34 members. Each year we've been able to award two $1,000 scholarships to one male and one female graduate to continue their college studies. We have donated over $2,000 to civic organizations and children's interest groups. We loan out wheelchairs, walkers, canes, and other medical equipment to the community at no cost. We place flags on over 400 veterans' graves at Maple Hill, St. Patrick's, Glenwood, and St. Mary's cemeteries. Our Color Honor Guard provides military funeral rites for any veteran, and we have provided this service in Clinton and Franklin counties in New York, and also in Grand Isle County in Vermont. We march in parades, and we also take part in memorial services in Clinton County, and every year we go to Hemingford, Quebec on their Remembrance Day to participate in their ceremony also. No. Talking about the Honor Guard, and I did at one time give a presentation to our local historical society. So some of them have heard this before, but some of you haven't. When we talk about our Honor Guard, I don't know how many of you are familiar with a gentleman by the name of Floyd Bennett. Floyd Bennett happened to be a pilot with Richard Byrd on his attempt to reach the North Pole. In fact, I believe it's in we're in Glens Falls, I think, there's an airport that is named after him. But anyway, he happened to be killed in Canada flying a plane. And Richard Byrd went up there and escorted his body back to the States. And at that time, the only way they were bringing bodies down was over the train. So this is an actual from the Plattsburgh Centennial, which is a newspaper out of Plattsburgh, Friday, April 27th, 1928. This is an actual newspaper article. Floyd Bennett returned to his native soil last night on the arrival of the D&H Limited at Rouses Point. The hero of the North Pole flight who entered Canada to bring success to beleaguered brother flyers and paid for a sense of service with his life. American Legion 912 of Rouses Point was the first organization to give official greetings to the funeral party. Headed by bearers of the Army and Navy colors, members of the post acting as an escort were drawn up in line in front of the station, and as the train pulled in, presented arms. As he stepped off the car, Commander Byrd saluted the colors and shook hands with each member of the Guard and expressed his gratitude to them for their kindness in meeting the remains of his dead comrade and giving military honors to him. Floyd Bennett's body was then transported to Washington, D.C. by train. He was also accompanied by his mother and aunt from Waterbury, Vermont, who had come over by the Rutland Railroad and boarded the train at Rouses Point to Washington. So the tradition carries on with our Honor Guard that we have here, and it makes no difference if that veteran is a member of this post or not. If somebody out there wants a military burial for a veteran, we're willing to do it. Oh. Now, along with what I have done as historian for the Post, is I've tried to put together pictures, newspaper articles of the Post happenings, people involved in the Post, the veterans. So what I have is there, you see some binders that are up here, and I have them kind of separated. This one here is the construction of the first building, the bar out there as it was being constructed, and in the latter part are all the pictures from when this was done, when it was torn down, right up until the point of what you see right now. So it gives a pictorial history of the Post as far as the rebuilding. The blue one that Ralph just brought over, this one had been done by Jim Rochester, and it can be passed around if anybody would like to look through it. But it's all the old newspaper clippings of these gentlemen from Rouses Point and Champlain that when they enlisted or where they were stationed or whatever throughout the years. So if anybody was, all of this will be available here at the Post. I'm willing to sit down with anybody if they want to do any type of research or whatever on any of their family members or whatever. So, the second one there is men from the town of Champlain who made the supreme sacrifice. And what I've done is I've tried to get pictures of them and also any newspaper articles. So one of the things that I'm looking for people that are here or happen to know of the families or whatever, and I can give a list. If anybody has any pictures that they would like to photocopy for me or any articles on any of these men who paid the supreme sacrifice during World War I, II, and Vietnam. World War I, supreme sacrifice from Rouses Point was Joseph A. Landry, Rainey A. Seguin, Henry C. Mayo, Clifford C. Mayo. All of them died in action during World War I. In World War II, Eugene Bombardier, Harry Bowes, Romeo Boyer, Kenneth Brothers, Charles F. DeGrampy from Champlain, Alfred Guyette, Robert Rawson, Loyola Roy, Robert Wallace, Benjamin Cardin. I have stuff on Amos E. Fozier, Orville Hoodlin, and Homer St. Andrew. I do have some stuff in this booklet, but it is not complete. Vietnam, we lost Tommy Eldridge, John Huntley, Bob LaFountain, and John Snow, who were here from Rouses Point, and from Champlain was Ori Buskey. So what I am trying to do is not only have their pictures, but also to have an account of how they were killed in action. So, and then that would be also available here. One of the old pictures that I have not been able to identify, when we had the fire in 1979 upstairs, some of the pictures survived. I have those in the book there. They had the pictures on the wall of the guys that made the supreme sacrifice in World War II. So I do have some of them, and the little names and when they were killed or whatever are on those pictures. But this one picture, I have not been able to identify, and there was no name on it or nothing. This gentleman was also one of the ones that was killed in action during World War II. And we have not yet been able to put a name to this man. So if anybody out there, and Calvin, after we can, take a good picture of it or whatever. So that way, if there's anybody that's out there that sees that, if we can put a name to this individual.
How do you know he died if you don't know his name?
It was up on the wall upstairs, and those were the pictures that were on the wall upstairs. As I can show you, see, this is one of the ones that was upstairs. See, and it gives the information and everything.
But his name?
Right, his name is there. This one wasn't.
Oh, sorry.
See, so that's why we're trying to find out who it is. Because his name, either during the fire, it slipped out of the picture frame or whatever. Because these were all in picture frames. And some of them, you'll see, they were fused to the glass. So I had to get them out some way off the glass, because the glass was all smoky or cracked or whatever. So I was able to get those pictures. But so this one here, I don't have an identification. Also, what I'm doing is I also have a book here from the town of Champlain that I've researched. This is the town of Champlain, men that were in the Civil War. And this is where I'll get in with Dr. Southwick, with his men or whatever. I have 315 names in that book of the men from the town of Champlain that were involved in the Civil War. I also have 10 that were not from the town of Champlain, but moved here after the Civil War and passed away here and are buried here in either St. Patrick's or Maple Hill. So, you can probably say that I'm a little bit of a history buff. And I just love doing this stuff. And then because I look at it as it's not only for the post or whatever, but it's also for the people that are out there to learn. Maybe they have a relative that was in the Civil War and they didn't even know about it. I'll give you an example. My Aunt Rita Manning, who was a bachelor, last summer she stopped up at Maple Hill, and there's a gentleman by the name of Reuben Batchelder that is buried up there. He is a Civil War vet. He originally enlisted in Stockholm, New York. And then after the Civil War, made his way here. She was up at the cemetery and she says, "Why is there a veteran sticker on his headstone?" And I says, "Well, that's to identify, because they haven't been identified in the past, so we can put flags on those grave sites each year." Because we keep adding, because now that what I have done is I have walked every headstone in St. Patrick's and Maple Hill. And any one of those that were a vet, I marked it down. And I also have that in this big folder. And this goes back to the Revolutionary War. But anyway, getting back, she didn't know that he was a Civil War vet, because it gets lost over the years if it doesn't get passed on. So this helps me to help somebody else to identify that this individual was a vet, which I'm very strong on. And that's why I say I kind of wish that I had joined the Legion in '74 when I got out or whatever, because I mean, it's just the camaraderie and, the bonding that we all go through is just amazing. It's just totally amazing. At Maple Hill, we have 3 Revolutionary War vets. We have 9 War of 1812 vets. We have 20 Civil War vets, 29 World War I vets, 38 World War II vets, 7 Korean vets, and 5 Vietnam vets, for a total of 111 veterans at Maple Hill Cemetery. At St. Pat's, we have 4 Civil War vets, 52 World War I vets, 112 World War II, 18 Korea, 14 Vietnam, for a total of 200 vets in St. Patrick's. So this is a rich history area for veterans that have served their country from the town of Champlain or somewhere else and moved into the town of Champlain. I have yet to do Glenwood Cemetery and St. Joseph's in Cooperville. And then we've got some smaller cemeteries like the Stetson Cemetery, which is down in Cooperville also, there in one of the back roads. So, but it's just having the time to do it. You know, that's the thing. One of our Civil War vets that happens to be up at Maple Hill. There is a virtual website called Find a Grave. And what I am doing is now on this virtual website, which is known throughout the world, is I'm going on and listing every vet from Maple Hill and St. Pat's. And I had done an individual by the name of John Hill Ingram. He's a Civil War vet. He enlisted out in Ogdensburg, New York. And I received an email from a woman, and I didn't recognize the email, but it said in reference to John Ingram. So I opened up the email, and the email stated, John Ingram is my great-great uncle. What can you tell me about him? So I wrote back to her, emailed, and said, well, what is it exactly that you're looking for or whatever? And she emailed me back and said, well, we were always told that my great-great uncle deserted the British Army and fled to the United States. So I went through online through the Northern New York Library Network, and I put John Hill Ingram's name in there and asked if there were any articles or whatever on him. And lo and behold, there was an article in there, his obituary in the Plattsburgh Centennial. And what I found out, and I subsequently emailed her, I went up and took a picture of the headstone for her and sent that to her through email, and also sent her the obituary. I typed it into the email and sent that to her. And his obituary reads, Civil War veteran, 2nd Lieutenant, Company H, 60th Regiment, New York, Infantry. Age 79 at the time of death. He was born in Shenstone, Stratashire, England. At the age of 17, he enlisted in the English service and was sent to Cork, Ireland with his regiment, and from there to Crimea. He fought in the Crimea War with England, and he saw active service, was wounded, and received a medal from Queen Victoria for valiant service at forgive my Russian here or whatever, this Sebastopol. Before the close of the Crimean War, his regiment was ordered to Canada. Upon reaching Canada, his term of service had expired and he was honorably discharged. He then came to New York State and was married. In 1861, when President Lincoln issued his call for volunteers, Mr. Ingram, though still a British subject, enlisted as a second sergeant in Company H of the 60th Regiment at Ogdensburg, New York. He was promoted to first sergeant in October and served as a second lieutenant in 1863. During the Battle of Antietam, September 17, 1862, he was severely wounded by a falling tree from which he never fully recovered. On February 23, 1863, he was honorably discharged and returned to his home, not again enlisting. Later, he became, by naturalization, an American citizen. In the spring of 1875, he with his family came to Rouses Point and lived here and made a host of friends. On June 7th, he was taken ill and succumbed to pneumonia on June 14th, 1969. His funeral was conducted at the Episcopal Church by the Reverend Mr. Miller, and left to mourn him were his wife, 2 sons, Casper of Ogdensburg and James of Rouses Point. 3 daughters, Mrs. Arthur Muller of Chazy, Mrs. Charles Klingman of Riverside, and Emma of Utica. And then he goes on to say several grandchildren and 1 grandchildren. Those from out of town who attended the services were comrades Dickinson, Steinbarge, Angel, and LaChance of the Moores Grand Army of the Republic. And this was from an obituary in 1916 in the Plattsburgh Centennial. So she emailed me back after she received this, and she thanked me for finding all this information about her great-great-uncle, and then she was going to turn around and search the military records in England. This is where she's from. She's from England, and happened to see this in the Find a Grave and contacted me on it. So it kind of, made me feel good that here the family thought that he was a deserter from the English Army, and turns out he was actually a hero, and then he came over here and fought in the Civil War. We also, up at Maple Hill, we have a gentleman by the name of Robert Granger. Robert Granger happened to be one of the caretakers for Fort Montgomery. And his obituary, August 31st, 1875. He was a native of Belfast, Ireland, came to this country, enlisted as a private in the 1st Regiment of Artillery at New York. In 1837, was made a sergeant. In 1845, and by command of General Wilfred Scott, promoted to the position of Ordnance Sergeant at Fort Baranicus in Florida in 1857. All the fort caretakers were Ordnance Sergeants. That's who they sent up to take care of the fort property. He has seen 38 years in the United States service. He was in the old Florida War, in the war with Mexico, under General Wilfred Scott, and was at the taking of the capital. And he took part in the last war for the Union in 1862. He assisted in the defense of Fort Pickens, and for a short time was a prisoner of the rebels in Baranicus, but soon effected his escape. His excellent character and soldierly qualities were highly spoken of by his superiors. He has resided here on the government reservation since 1862 and was respected by all. And this is a quote that was in there. He met the last enemy bravely, and as any Christian soldier only can. Wrapped in the dear old flag, his remains were interred in Maple Hill Cemetery. The Reverend G.O.C. Pinnell officiating at the funeral. He left a wife and 2 sons. So, and just to divert a little bit from the Civil War, and this was brought to my attention by our historian, Donna Racine. We also have an individual by the name of Private William E. Smith. He was born in Rouses Point, New York. He was a farmer. And he enlisted September 13th, 1875 in the U.S. Cavalry. He happened to be at Custer's last stand. But he was one of the survivors because there were also 2 other units besides Custer at Little Bighorn. Custer was in the main battle. This gentleman, William E. Smith, was 4.5 miles from where Custer fell because his unit, which was commanded by Captain Frederick Benteen at the time, was ordered by Custer to just watch for Indians that would be running from the main battle and to, capture or kill them or whatever. So anyway, he survived the hilltop fight. He died in South Deerfield, Massachusetts, and he's buried in Brookside Cemetery in South Deerfield, Massachusetts. Grave 1, Lot 16B, Section 6, with his wife. But he was born here in Rouses Point. So, not just, the Civil War or whatever, but also we've got somebody that was involved with Custer and Little Bighorn. So, now, to try and do a little bit here on with Dr. Southwick's letters. You remember he mentioned James Lucas, who was with the 153rd Infantry Company I. Well, James Lucas was killed on October 19th, 1864 at Cedar Creek, Virginia. Now the names that he listed in his letters to his mother and I believe sisters and brothers or whatever, I think that Dr. Southwick had mentioned. One of the ones was Albert H. Cook. And these are all from the town of Champlain. So Albert H. Cook was 18 years old when he enlisted May 22nd, 1861 at Champlain. He was to serve 2 years. He was mustered in as a private on Company D on June 15th, 1861. He was promoted corporal, date not stated, and he was mustered out with the company June 30th, 1868 at Albany, New York. So his whole unit, at that time what they did was they mustered out the whole unit. The war, they didn't, they made their commitment or whatever, so they were mustered out. And that happened to be he was a member of the 34th Infantry Regiment, Company D, along with Henry J. Cooper, who was also mentioned. Henry J. Cooper was age 18. He enlisted May 22nd, 1861 at Champlain to serve 2 years. He was mustered in as a sergeant, Company D, on June 15th, 1861. He was discharged for disability on May 21st, 1862 at Yorktown, Virginia. Usually when you were mustered out because of disability or whatever, it is because you had been wounded or whatever and you could no longer fight with your comrades on the field. He was also in the 34th. Cyrus H. Kellogg. I don't know if you remember that name that Dr. Southwick had. He was age 18 years. He enlisted May 22nd, 1861 at Champlain to serve 2 years. Mustered in as a corporal, Company D, June 15th, 1861. He was captured September 17th, 1861, but then he was paroled by the Confederacy in August of 1862. He was promoted a sergeant on June 15th, 1863, and mustered out with the company June 30th, 1863 at Albany, New York. A little interesting fact is that usually during the Civil War, when an individual was captured, either by the North or the South, they were paroled. And the parole conditions were that they were not supposed to take up arms again, join their unit or join another unit or whatever to continue the battle. The problem was, as you can see, a lot of them did, whether it was from North or South. So it got to a point where there was no more paroles from the North or the South, because they thought that either through attrition, through being in battle and dying, or if you were captured and signed a paper that said you wouldn't take up arms again, that wouldn't put one more man back on the battlefield. But that's what happened, and so at a point in the Civil War, they stopped the parole of prisoners. Louis LePage, age 18, enlisted November 1st, 1861 in Champlain to serve an unexpired term of 2 years. Mustered in as a private, Company D. Wounded June 30th, 1862 at White Oak Swamp, Virginia. And he was mustered out with the company June 30th, 1863 at Albany, New York. His name at the time when he enlisted was spelled LePage, L-E-P-A-G-E. When he was mustered out, he mustered out as LePage, but it was capital L, small a, large P, small A-G-E. So that's where you get sometimes the difference when somebody says, well, my family name was such and such. They might have mustered out or even enlisted as a different name, even a different spelling. And then the last one from the 34th was Emerson Smith, who was age 19 when he enlisted. In May of 1861 at Champlain and served 2 years, mustered as a private, Company D, June 15th, 1861. And he transferred to the regular army in October 9th of 1862. So he didn't belong to a New York infantry regiment. He belonged to the United States Army at that time, is what he did. He transferred. There was one with the 60th New York Infantry Regiment, and that was Alexander LeBleu. Age 18, enlisted September 21st at Champlain, 1861, served 3 years. Mustered in as a private, Company H, October 30th, 1861. He deserted October 24th, 1862, from Loudon Heights, Virginia. When we think of present-day military or whatever, and we think deserted, you know, it has more of a meaning now than it did then. Desertions during the Civil War were a common thing. One is they would be disillusioned once they joined. If they saw their first battle, it was too much for them to continue on that way. And they were, you know, homesick or whatever. There were a lot of desertions. In fact, it got to a point where President Lincoln had to start pardoning these people that were deserted. And there are records in here that I have of desertions where people came back, men came back and rejoined their unit, and they were accepted back into their unit. So back then, desertion didn't mean what it does in modern times, because it was widespread, not just from the Union, but also from the Confederacy. So it's not a black mark on anybody's record or anybody's family during the Civil War, because it was an accepted practice. I don't want to bore you. I just have a few more here. From the 118th Infantry, he mentioned two names, Eugene Gilbert and Benjamin Rogers. Eugene Gilbert Age 21, enlisted August 22nd, 1862 at Champlain to serve 3 years, mustered in as a private, Company I, August 29th, 1862, discharged with detachment, June 9th, 1865, at Fort Monroe, Virginia. And the other individual, Benjamin Rogers, he was 25 years old when he enlisted. On August 6, 1862 at Champlain to serve 3 years. Mustered in as a private, Company A, August 20th, 1862. Promoted sergeant, August 29th, 1862. Promoted first sergeant, June 1st, 1865. Mustered out with the company June 13th, 1865 at Richmond, Virginia. He was also born as Benjamin F. Rogers. When he enlisted, he was Benjamin V. Rogers. So you can understand why people get lost, through the years or whatever. Now, the 153rd, there were 2 names there, Alexander Douglas and a Charles F. Hubble. Alexander J. Douglas, age 18, enlisted August 28, 1862 at Champlain to serve 3 years. Mustered as a private, Company H, on October 3rd, 1862. Promoted corporal, Company I, January 1st, 1863. Became commissary sergeant, May 9th, 1861. Mustered out with the regiment, October 2nd, 1865, at Savannah, Georgia. So you can see where some of these names didn't come back here into the area or whatever. They were mustered out down south or whatever, and wherever they went, you never know. But they started out here. The other one, Charles F. Hubble, age 25, enlisted August 30th, 1862 at Champlain to serve 3 years. Mustered in as a private, Company I, October 3rd, 1862. Promoted corporal, October 18th, 1862. Mustered out with company, October 2nd, 1865, at Savannah, Georgia. He did come back because he's buried in Glenwood Cemetery. Just to give you, this individual is not in Dr. Southwick's letters, but just to give you an idea, there's a gentleman by the name of James O'Neill, age 23, enlisted August 29th, 1862 at Champlain to serve 3 years. Mustered in as a private, Company I, October 18th, 1862. He was wounded in action, September 19th, 1864, at Opequon, Virginia. He was absent at that time. Nobody knew where he was when he was wounded, and when his company was mustered out, he was still absent. So you don't know if he died of his wounds and nobody knew about it, or if he deserted or whatever. But when it came time for his company to muster out, he was nowhere to be found. And there are some in here that were listed as prisoners of war at the time, and when it came time to muster out the company, they never showed up. Same way as some that were killed in action. If they didn't know that they were wounded and they didn't find them, they presumed they were killed in action or whatever, and they were listed as missing during the muster out of the company. We have one cavalry regiment, the 9th Cavalry, Company M, that was recruited mainly here in Rouses Point. And of those, 12 of them participated in the Battle of Gettysburg. No. And they were recruited mainly in Rouses Point, Company M of the 9th Cavalry Regiment. The 9th Cavalry Regiment was a unit under General Buford's company. General Buford was the first Union general that arrived in Gettysburg while the Confederacy was massing at Gettysburg. And General Buford and his regiment of cavalry were able to hold off the Confederates until the main body of the Union was able to get there and occupy what they called the Heights. But it was General Buford's unit that stopped the Confederacy there and kind of turned. They call Gettysburg the turning point of the Civil War. Even though the Union lost other battles after that, that was the breaking point of the Civil War with Robert E. Lee. No. And as far as the 11th Cavalry, there were 3 names that James Lucas identified as meeting when he was in Washington. Freeman H. Boron, B-O-U-R-O-N, age 22 years, enlisted March 5th, 1862 at Champlain. Mustered in as a private, Company H, March 3rd, 1862 to serve 3 years. Appointed corporal, March 21st, 1862. Sergeant in June 5th, 1862. First sergeant, date not stated. He mustered out March 4th, 1865 at Memphis, Tennessee. He was also born as Truman H. Borrow. Commissioned a second lieutenant January 3rd, 1865 with rank from January 5, 1865. Charles Dodd, age 18, enlisted February 19th, 1862 at Champlain. Mustered in as a private, Company H, March 1862, to serve 3 years. Mustered out March 14th at Memphis, Tennessee. He was also born as Dodd, D-O-D-D. When he enlisted, it was Dodds, D-O-D-D-S. He did come back to the area. He's buried in Glenwood Cemetery. And the last one that Dr. Southwick mentioned as far as James Lucas meeting from the town of Champlain was John LaFountain, age 19 years, enlisted February 19th, 1862 at Champlain. Mustered in as a private, Company H, March 5th, 1862 to serve 3 years. He was lost at sea December 22nd, 1864 by the floundering of the steamer North America off the coast of Florida. There were quite a few Union soldiers that lost their lives when this steamer capsized off the coast of Florida, and John LaFountain happened to be one of them. So it wasn't just in battle that some of these lost their lives. A lot of during the Civil War, there were a lot of men that lost their lives from disease. Smallpox, also from the amputations or whatever when they were wounded in battle. Dysentery. No, because the latrines were located upstream from where the water was going to be. There was no, at that time, thinking about sanitary conditions or whatever. And, that's why a lot of them, also died of disease. So, but again, that's only a few names that John Southwick had. Like I said, I've got 315 names from the town of Champlain. So if anybody wants to look through the stuff or whatever. The other book that I had talked about and I listed, and I have from World War I right up through the Persian Gulf. I have names of individuals that were either members of this post or moved to this area or enlisted in this area during each of those conflicts. What I am presently doing is, and you'll be able to look through this one, I list the name, I list the branch of service that they were in, if I can find it. I list their date of birth, their date of death, and also what cemetery they are buried in. So that way then, it also gives a history of, for somebody to come in and a relative or whatever and saying, you know, I know he fought in World War I. And what I'm always looking for are updates to these lists. So if there are any families or whatever that, what I would like to do is I would like to know what branch of service that they served in. If they are you know, their date of birth, if they have passed away, their date of death, and what cemetery they might be in. Because I have some from that are buried in Rhode Island. I have some listed that you know like Alberg, Vermont, Mount Royal, Montreal. These are all veterans from the different wars. Again, like I said, either they were from Rouses Point or the town of Champlain, or they were members of the Legion here at Post 912, or they enlisted. They were residents here of the village. So, and so what I would like also, if anybody has pictures of any of these veterans, I'm not looking for original pictures. What I would like are just photocopies or whatever. So that way we can have them in a book. And that way then you can put a face to a name. And it means more to a family if they can put a face to a name of somebody. You know, it's like Ben Arnold brought me this picture here, and also on the back, this is Art Vanderbeek on the back. Okay? So pictures like this, that photocopies of or whatever, I would like to include here in our books that we will have here. And again, like I said, I'd be more than willing to sit down with anybody or, you know, and listen to them, get their story, get their pictures or whatever. So that way we have a more complete history of the veterans that we have had in the area. So, another project that we took on last year was we kind of adopted Maple Hill Cemetery. And we started out with cutting the brush and everything along the perimeter. And then through George, we were able to get some of the inmates over the summer and that went in there and to do some of the brush and that. So that kind of freed us up to what we are doing now is on some of these small stones that have fallen over on the ground and that, we're going around and there's a group of us volunteers in that, and we've, you know, we're working with the Cemetery Association, with Donna, with Sally Smith and that, and we're raising these headstones back up. And we can't, at this point, we didn't put them in cement bases or whatever. All we did was lift them up and then maybe dig a small trench or whatever to stand it up against the base that is still there. The bigger ones or whatever, well, there's nothing that we can do with the ones that are leaning in that, but the small ones is what we're doing. We are also in the cemetery itself, and I joke with Sally about this, we are, in the cemetery you have footstones, and you also have what they call headstones, but it's not the main stone. Over the years, these things have sunk into the ground at Maple Hill. We're bringing them back up and putting them back up on the ground. So that way you have the footstones. There are also lot markers that mark the four corners of a lot that are buried, that we're bringing back up. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring Maple Hill back to what it was in the early 30s. And we're using Mr. McClellan's cemetery book, because when he did it in the 30s, he marked down if there were headstones or footstones or whatever. So we're able to probe and find them and bring them back up. Is what we're doing. So we kind of, because, you know, I have a thing with cemeteries. You know, it's
Okay.
I'm not ghoulish, but okay, but it's the thing, and in fact, I have to bring this up, and because with all the research that I do and the cemeteries that I visit, I kind of get it from my family that I spend more time with dead people than I do with them, which I don't think is a bad thing. You know, it's a nice place. You know, it's quiet. Yes. So, but
They don't talk back.
But anyway, I guess one of the other things that, and you'll see this up here, my 4 years in Jap prison camps. This was written by Master Sergeant Stanley E. Bowes when he was captured by the Japanese in the Philippines. And it's a two-sided or whatever. But this is a very good article that appeared in the North Countryman on Thursday, January 10th, 1946. And this is a copy of it. And he talks about when he was captured and the different prisoner of war camps that he went through. So all this is available to anybody that wants to stop in. The only thing I ask is that you kind of make arrangements with me or whatever, so that way we can also keep control of it, and also if there's anything that I know that I can pass it on, or even pass you on to somebody else that might know the history or whatever. Recently, which was last week, right? We had the Underground Railroad presentation here. And we had some reenactors called the Greys and Blues from Montreal, or Civil War enactors. And my good friend Benny took this picture, and this is when they had their little cannon set up out front in front of our sign. So, Benny's been very invaluable as far as pictures. Donna has been very invaluable to me for research on the vets and everything. And of course, Donna has a lot more knowledge of a lot more stuff. I try and just concentrate on the thing with the vets. I could never, never,
I'd like to clarify that a bit. No one has more knowledge than Bob does on veterans, and I just grant that to him and back right off, because he's taken that off my shoulders, so now I have an assignment for you.
Oh.
There's a name, Lyman Bowron, B-O-W-R-O-N, like that, Frederick.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Civil War vet, and he just escapes me because his discharge papers and his pension papers are at odds with each other. On one, he's lost a leg, on the other, he's lost an arm, and I would like to know which one he lost.
Oh.
I'll leave that to you.
Okay.
And by the way, he built that Bowron building on the corner of State and Lake. That's the man who put that building up, but I'm just curious about it.
I'll see what I can find. I can't make any guarantee on that as far as, but.
You went from left-handed to right-handed. In a wheelchair. What does that tell you?
Right.
He wasn't in a wheelchair. So I read where someone said if you were sitting on the Hollow Steps, who you would see go by that day, and you would see John Bowron and his son John Walker Bowron. And he's walking, and he could have had prosthesis, But I'm tending to think it's the arm, but I would just like to know,
Mm-hmm.
be sure.
I'll see what I can find out. It's a tall order, but I'll see what. But again, I want to thank you for being here this evening, and I hope that, I have given you a little thought about, our veterans and also what the Legion is here and what the Legion does. And, like I said, I can't say enough about my fellow Legion members. It's just unbelievable, the support and the camaraderie and the help when I'm just completing my first year as commander. So this is what they call that getting your feet wet thing or whatever. Okay? But I can't say enough for the help that I have gotten, from Rodney, from Pitt, from Dick, George, Harry, some of the guys that have been here, Bruce, that have been here longer than I have. And to be able to do the job as commander, and also to instill, how do I put that, as far as, wanting me as the historian here for the post. I can't thank them enough for what they have done for me since I have joined. And like I said, I've only been here 4 years now. So, and it's been one heck of an experience for me. And the only regret I have is that I didn't do it sooner. That's the only regret I have. So I want to thank you all for being here. If anybody has no questions, which Don already gave me one hard one already to do. They do have light refreshments here for you, so enjoy yourself, and thank you again for coming.